Once upon a time, there lived a small boy named Jimmy. Amongst all his friends, Jimmy had one best friend, and that was Inni, Jimmy's inner voice. Inni was invisible to others, but it always stood by Jimmy's side through thick and thin, highs and lows, and happiness and sadness. As a kid, Jimmy would follow everything that Inni said. It would tell Jimmy to ring the neighbor's bell and run away. It would tell him to paint the walls, talk to his dog, jump over the fence, hug and kiss his parents, lie on the grass, find meaning in the clouds, and the list was endless. Sometimes Inni was naughty, and sometimes it was wise, but whatever it made Jimmy do, it always ensured to bring a smile to his face. Jimmy loved playing cricket, and with Inni's wisdom, he had become the best batsman of his school. Jimmy and Inni would talk for hours about cricket, the forms Jimmy should choose, the shots he should play, and the way he should tackle the tricky spinners. Years passed, and Jimmy soon reached the peak of his form. But then one day, his parents said, "Honey, next year you have your 10th board exams. We know you love playing cricket and wish to make a career in it, but studies are equally important. So, take a break from cricket this year." Jimmy argued, but his parents didn't agree. He came to his room, and Inni spoke immediately. "Jimmy, I don't think we should take a break. You are at the peak of your form, and if you keep this up, you will soon play the Nationals." Jimmy trusted Inni. So the next day, he went for practice without informing his parents. But as the bowler bowled the bowl, Jimmy suddenly froze. Inni screamed, saying, "Play the straight drive shot." But suddenly, Inni's voice was overpowered by Jimmy's parents' voice. For the next few days, the same thing kept happening. The moment it was time to swing the bat, Jimmy would freeze. Then, one day, Inni snapped at Jimmy and said, "What's wrong with you, mate? Today, I screamed at the top of my voice and asked you to play the cover drive, and you just stood there like a statue and let the ball pass." Jimmy didn't reply to Inni and chose to stay silent. He continued playing cricket, but slowly he was losing his form. After a few days, Jimmy stopped going to practice. He focused on his studies, scored well, and made his parents happy. Years passed, and Jimmy stopped listening to Inni and started listening to his parents. He got a job, married a girl his parents found for him, built a home, and birthed kids. But even after all of this, he felt that something was missing. Inni had disappeared, and the smile on Jimmy's face had also faded. But his parents were very happy. They would brag in front of their friends about Jimmy's wealth, his car, his house, and his success. On the other hand, Jimmy was always very irritated. He would smile once or twice with his friends, but most of the time, it felt like he was surviving the days. Then, one day, Jimmy's office team planned a cricket tournament. Jimmy watched from the sidelines, leaning against a metal pole. "Come on, Jimmy, we need a batsman," his manager shouted, waving him over. Jimmy had not touched a bat for ages. His heart sank, but he still went ahead and grabbed the bat. He took his stance. The bowler bowled a ball. In the old day, this was the moment when Inni would pop into Jimmy's mind and say, "Focus on the ball, spine straight, hit through the cover." But now, there was absolute silence in his mind. No trace of Inni. No voice, no nudge, no spark. Jimmy swung the bat blindly, out of muscle memory, and missed. The next ball came. Jimmy looked into the dark corners of his heart, calling out to Inni. "Inni, are you there? Help me." Again, nothing. Jimmy had spent 20 years ignoring Inni, and now, when he finally reached out, Inni was gone. He realized he hadn't just lost cricket, he had lost the only voice that truly knew him. He dropped the bat. "I can't do this," he muttered. "Hey, it's just a game, Jimmy," his colleague said, confused by the look on Jimmy's face. Jimmy walked off the turf and drove directly to his childhood home. He went to his room and held his bat that was now covered in spider webs. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. The irritation was gone, replaced by a raw, hollow ache. I listened to everyone else. I built the house they wanted. I bought the car they brag about. But I'm so lonely, Inni. I'm so tired of being perfect and empty. He sat there for an hour waiting for a sign from Inni. But nothing. Then, when Jimmy stood up to leave, a very faint voice came from his heart. "Your grip was too tight," a dry voice whispered. It sounded like someone who hadn't used their vocal cords in a lifetime. "You were holding the bat like a spreadsheet, Jimmy." Jimmy gasped. A single tear ran through his cheeks. "You're still here?" "I have nowhere else to go," Inni replied. "What shall I do, Inni? I'm lost in this pressure," Jimmy asked. "First," Inni whispered, "go buy a real bat. Second, call your wife. Tell her you're going to be late because you're busy talking to an old friend." Jimmy laughed through his tears. "You know, for an inner voice, you're pretty annoying," said Jimmy. For the next few months, Jimmy made small changes, nothing dramatic. He didn't quit his job. He didn't sell his house. He didn't run away from his responsibilities. He simply started listening. He spent more time with his wife and children. He played cricket on weekends. He stopped making decisions just because they made other people happy. And every time life became noisy, Inni was there. Sometimes as a whisper, sometimes as a nudge, sometimes as a stubborn voice that refused to be ignored. Slowly, the emptiness inside Jimmy began to disappear. Now, Jimmy would often sit on the cricket field after a match and smile for no reason. Because he finally understood something. In life, we often stop listening to our inner voice because the voices outside are so loud. Parents, friends, teachers, society, expectations, everyone tells us who we should be. And after a while, we become so busy listening to them that we stop listening to ourselves. Some people are fortunate enough to realize they have lost that voice and find their way back. Others spend their entire lives chasing success, approval, and perfection, never hearing it again. Ever wondered why we were so happy as kids? Because that was the only time we fully listened to our inner voice, before the world told us who to become. And maybe happiness is nothing more than finding that voice again.